We're live.
We're live. Welcome back, everyone, to House Committee on General and Housing. We are now turning back to 8772, the landlord tenant law. We have been yesterday walking through the bill as redrafted by our council. And we're going to continue that process this morning until noon. And then, if necessary, continue at afternoon. Then we can move on to discussion. Where were we, council? And let us know also, I know you were working on some sections.
Yes, sir. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am just getting ready to share my screen, and then I will bring us right back to where we were yesterday. We are discussing H 772, strike all amendment from the committee, draft 1.1. And if you all recall where we left off, we were talking about termination periods. And we left off on page 8. So let me get us there.
Just to I'm reminding the committee to refresh your memories, which probably don't need refreshing. The law is divided into two parts. One part deals with what's in a document, a lease, or whatever. It regulates the relationship between the landlord and tenant. And in that piece, one of the things that it talks about is the notice of termination of the lease. The second part deals with ejectment proceedings in court. We're still on the first part, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So yesterday, towards the end of the day, I think it was, we walked through subsection A about, non-payment of rent. We walked through subsection B about when the tenant breaches the lease agreement or doing acts of violence, etc. Then we got to subsection C, where 772 is proposing to just change it to say that if the tenant provides actual notice of a date they're going to terminate or vacate, or the government provides, an order that the person needs to vacate, then termination is whatever that day is. So now we're on sub D. Okay. Currently, this is when a property is sold, and it's when a property is sold, there's 30 days. The termination notice period is 30 days. What 772 is doing is it's saying sold or repurposed in the event that the property is contracted to sell the building, needed for the landlord or the landlord's immediate family to occupy the premises, permanently withdrawing it or demolishing or renovating it. You have to provide 90 days notice. And then when you get to subdivision E, here on the bottom of page 9, if you all remember, currently,
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, in current law, what happens if a landlord is not truthful about these uses?
so in current law, this is not spelled out. All of this would be new language. So under the current statutory language, you can, if the property is sold, and then you can terminate if there is no written rental agreement, as long as you're providing a certain number of days notice. And that's actually where I was going to get us to, is if you remember, the current law is it's either 60 days notice or 90 days notice if you don't have a written rental agreement, depending on how long you've been there. And then those dates are actually different. If you have a written rental agreement, it's less. If you have the written agreement, it's 30 days or 60 days. So the issue that you run into, I guess, is if you're trying to imagine a scenario where the landlord may not be telling the truth, if you will, Keep in mind, if the landlord doesn't need a reason to terminate your agreement.
See, the current law doesn't deal with it. It doesn't come up because the landlord can just not renew the lease. And the notice periods are less. It doesn't matter why they're not renewing the lease. They also can't, just to be really clear, under current law and also under this bill, a landlord can't repurpose for any other purpose until the lease is up. In other words, it's not like, let's say you enter into a 12-year, correct me if I'm wrong. Under both current law, I had to ask him this question, so, I'm just repeating what I've been taught here. Under current law, let's say you get a 12-month lease. A landlord can decide not to renew the lease for any reason, including they want to repurpose the building, they want to, for their family, whatever, but they can't do it during the lease. The lease is the lease. So that's true under the new law. The difference is, as Elizabeth is mentioning, is that they can do it for any reason, so there's nothing to lie about. They just do it. And if they do it, they don't have to say why. Under this bill, as you will see, it's all spelled out what are the different reasons they can do it, and they have to explain why.
But what if they're not truthful when they
Right.
explain it?
So,
I mean, I
Okay.
guess my concern, just to say it, is that and if we take away no cause, then we'll have a bunch of these popping up that were my family's moving in, popping up, where it's not necessarily truthful, and that just winds up being the default.
Right.
And so what are we doing it for?
Yeah, so, a few thoughts and comments. Currently, as was mentioned, if you have a lease, you have to wait till the end of the lease. You have to provide a notice before that if you're not going to allow the person to stay. If you do not have a written agreement, then you need no reason whatsoever. You just have to comply with the timeframe, which is 60 or 90 days. Under this bill, there is a slight thing here to be aware of. You're adding in these specific reasons to potentially terminate an agreement. And the question you're asking, Rep. Burrows, is okay, well, what do we do when someone is lying about this? If you're saying that I'm terminating it because I need it to rent it to a member of my immediate family member, but you're not being truthful. The issue with this amendment right now is that's not going to matter. It's not going to matter because the periods, the notice periods are the same. So under this subdivision, if you're going to terminate because you want someone for your immediate family member to move in, it's 90 days. The same period exists to terminate for no reason whatsoever. So even if you're lying about it, even if you as a tenant, or excuse me, even if you as the landlord are telling someone, hey, I have somebody from my immediate family who's going to move in, maybe you're just not good at, you don't want to kick somebody out, so you're fabricating some reason to try to make it more palatable to the individual. It's not going to matter because the periods are the same.
I want to illustrate this. There's a policy question buried here that we've had a discussion about. Okay. Under current law, there is no such thing as for cause. I mean, basically, a landlord simply doesn't have to renew a lease, period. So there's nothing to lie about. Okay. I felt that it was one thing that should change was we should spell out the different reasons that landlords can act. And one is, for example, they remodel, but we're defining it has to be a remodel at least 50%, et cetera. It has to be a serious remodel. Another was that it's necessary for the landlord or a member of the landlord's immediate family, and that's defined as well. So, hear me out now. And I want I felt that the landlord should have to explain why. Which one of these, it's for my immediate family, whatever. Aside from this is part of civility argument, I felt that there ought to be a consequence if the landlord lied. If the landlord said, oh, I want to move my family in, and then just didn't for no reason. Or if the landlord said, I want to remodel, but it didn't happen, etc. Council's reaction. So I said, I want a consequence, like they have to pay moving expenses or something if they lie. Unless, of course, they demonstrate there was a good reason I was going to move my son in and it didn't happen, whatever. But if there was just no reason, if it was in bad faith. Council responded to me by saying, why would you do that? Why would you have a consequence if they can always terminate the lease without any reason? In other words, they can, when the lease runs, they could just wait till the lease runs out. The only reason in the first draft of this bill that we differentiated between all these things was because they had different notice periods, but they don't anymore. They're just all 90 days. My own view personally is I would like to see a requirement that they have to say why and a consequences if there's just total bad faith. The only remedy would be, I got to tell you, would be that let's say I'm a tenant. The landlord says, Mark, you got to go because I'm remodeling the unit. Okay. And then they just don't. So let's say the remedy would be, well, then they have to pay a month's moving expenses, a month's rent. Well, the burden would be on me, Elizabeth, to sue. I'm out. I'm gone. We don't have a landlord-tenant relationship anymore, so I would have to sue. But I could, and there would be a remedy. But it's not in the bill now. There's nothing in the bill.
And I will 100% agree with everything the chair said. I would say it this way as a policy decision. If you're going to make this under the sub D, if you're going to make the notice period different, if you're needing to remodel or you're needing to move in an immediate family member or you're contracting to sell the building, if you're going to make that notice period somehow less than the notice period,
Or more.
Potentially, but you could run into a separate thought there. But if you're going to make it less, then it's an incentive for I want to say an incentive. It's a reason a landlord may at that point utilize it because I can move you out of the unit sooner. At that point, I do think there's an argument to be made to include some sort of consequence if you find that the landlord is somehow willfully lying or kind of falsifying the reason for the termination. And Mr. Chair, however, you all, the policy would like to set that up. It's either, moving expenses and a month's rent or something to that effect. I do think that it would make sense in that scenario. As the scenario of this amendment as it's currently drafted, simply because the termination periods are the same, I don't imagine a landlord ever telling you any of these reasons because they don't have to. I'm just going to terminate it under the sub E. I don't have to give you a reason.
Okay. Do you guys follow what he just said? Thought.
I do have a thought. Okay, so you have an apartment building, let's say it has even 8 units in it. Everybody's lease is starting at a different time.
Right.
So let's say you did want to renovate the building. It could take a long time to, giving, what do we do, 90-day notices to, let's say we're going to renovate to get that building empty. So, like, what kind of time frame are you going to put in there? Like, after the last one is out, then you have 3 months to start your
So
project.
you're arguing, let me just kind of rephrase this. This is important. So it seems to me, I'm going to try to put I'm gonna reflect back your argument as I hear it. What you're saying is the problem with trying to have a consequence is that you'd have to put a reasonable time limit on it and you'd have to define it further. In other words, it may be that you give notices on, I'm just gonna pick a date, June 1. But by the time everybody actually moves out, the building's clear, it's already August. And then you start work, or September, or whatever, and you start work, the building's empty, you start work. You wouldn't want someone to be able to sue you for lying in July or August or September because it's not reasonable. So we would have to define it, right?
Well, yeah, I feel like that's, if you wanted to go this route, which I don't want to go, but if you wanted to do this, I just feel like you have to put even more in there.
But
And then what if your contractor, like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't, well, we all know how they are, right?
That kind of,
And then, oh, we can't come and do that project right now, we can't come for another 6 months.
but that would be a defense, then that would be a defense to any bad faith claim. Like you would go in and you would say, look, Your Honor, the building's empty and I am not, we have a contract and they can't do it yet.
I just feel like we're putting more on the courts.
Okay,
And-
all right. I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just trying to clarify things here.
And one other quick point, the language that's in the bill does give the tenant the right of first refusal to come back if they've been removed due to a renovation. Not for any of the other circumstances, but due to the renovation. Mr. Chair, I agree with you, that would be a defense and some sort of claim brought.
Mary and then Elizabeth.
So if they have the right to come back, normally the landlord would raise the rent if they have done all of the renovations. I don't think that a tenant who moves out of the apartment and has to find another place to live with first month, last month, is going to want to spend all this money on going a corner. I mean, what's the point? If they're in another apartment, it happened.
And you do bring up another key point. I should just pull up the language. It does specify that so this is in the sub D here. So provided that the tenant shall have the right of first refusal to reoccupy the unit at market rate following the renovations. So you brought up that point, they may raise the rent after you've done the renovation.
They may not.
In the language, they may not, right? But the language.
But they may, it just gives a right that they might. Elizabeth?
why would your whole building need to be empty before you could start renovating?
Oh, you haven't looked at
Like
our
person.
lead laws?
Sorry.
You haven't looked at our lead laws?
Explain, there's just, you don't have to just explain it to her.
The lead laws?
Oh, but
Yeah. There's a lot of plastic involved when you have to renovate a building according to our lead laws in Vermont. It's like so complicated.
You can't, in other words, you cannot expose to one tenant who's still there to the dangers of renovation, usually.
You notify everybody.
Lead
have 60
problem.
60 days beforehand. Everything is encapsulated in plastic.
Yep.
Those renovations can only happen when the supervisor is on site. So if he can train the people that are going to be doing the renovation, but if he has to leave the premises, everybody has to stop working. It's just, it can turn into a long process. You can't do outside work if it's windy. I don't know if you've ever seen buildings done. I mean, that's what they did right in St. Johnsbury.
Yeah, we had
Eastern and Railroad, they emptied the entire building and totally gutted the whole thing, lead safe practices.
We had a proposed bill last biennium that included, I believe, updates to lead removal, lead paint laws, so we heard a lot from
Yeah,
landlords about that.
I mean, conceivably, a landlord, wouldn't a landlord have? If they're not doing a total gut job and a total rehab, but they simply want to rehabilitate one unit because it's damaged.
Right.
They could do that and presumably would have an incentive to keep as much of the building rented as they could.
Yeah.
I guess it would depend.
I mean, we were talking about a total renovation.
Go ahead, Council. Go ahead.
Okay, so just to bring us back here, we're on page 9, moving to page 10. So the proposed amendment here would make those termination notice periods that are in the control, sole control of the landlord. And Mr. Chair, you kind of, phrased it in that context. So, some of the terminations are due to tenant activity, A and B. Some of them are due to the sole kind of, the landlord making a determination that they want to do something else with the unit, not, renew the agreement. This proposal in D and E makes the termination period when the landlord is the one initiating it in that sense, 90 days across the board. Which is different than the current statutory framework, which is dependent on whether you have a written agreement, not a written agreement, whether you've been there 2 years, whether you're not, 2 years less, 2 years. Okay, so now top of page 10. This includes the language about the week-to-week rental agreements. I think at one point it was struck in the bill as introduced, but we did hear some comments that there are some week-to-week rentals that still exist, so it is probably worth keeping in that event. This says if there is a written and this is current statute, this doesn't change it. If there is a written
No,
if there is, this is the current law, if there's a written week-to-week rental agreement, this is taking that out and just saying if there is a week-to-week rental agreement, whether it's in writing or not, the notice shall be at least 7 days. And then it states, however, a notice to terminate for non-payment of rent shall be as provided in subsection A. And I'm just highlighting that for a policy decision for you all. If you're making the week-to-week rental termination period 7 days, the notice to terminate for non-payment of rent is 10 days. So that
doesn't make sense.
Yes, sir. It just seems to be a little bit, it would be an inconsistency. It currently exists.
Why don't we just make it 10 days?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Then we move to sub F.
I don't want to, if someone disagrees with me, say it. I'm just trying to move on here on something that's pretty simple. Yeah,
Well, I always like the lesser number.
the lesson. Yes, I know. I saw your face, Debbie.
Okay.
That's why I said what I did. Okay.
For
And
the-
I'm in my.
Minor dissent registered here.
The next draft, I will have 10. For sub F, so Mr. Chair, you kind of alluded to this a bit ago. What I've added here is currently. all
You're on page 10?
Yes, sir. Page 10, line 5, the sub F. Currently says that it has to include the termination date for every notice, and I'm slightly tweaking this to say that in all cases, the termination date shall be specifically stated in the notice as well as the reason for termination.
Right.
Okay, so now moving forward, we have conversion to condominiums, and there's a separate title, 27, dealing with property, and a separate chapter that has a lot of information about timelines of notice, et cetera, when you're converting a building to a condominium, so that there's no change there. Sub H is about shared occupancy. And what this would change it to is currently there is a difference in whether it is monthly or weekly, and this would make it consistent. If you're in a shared occupancy, the notice to terminate would be 7 days after the date of actual notice. So there's no change from the bill as introduced. Sub I is about multiple notices, and no change from the bill as introduced. We get to subsection J. No change here. If you all recall, though, this is about payment after termination. So if you provided a termination notice for acceptance of full or partial payments for reasons other than non-payment of rent. So if you're provided someone notice because they breached the terms of the lease agreement and you're moving forward with the termination on that basis, and the person pays you rent because they're still living there, that doesn't somehow negate your termination notice. You can still move forward with the termination, even if you accept partial or full payment of rent. Then we get to sub K, which is commencing ejectment action. There's no changes to the bill as introduced, but just as a quick reminder, this is the section that says if you provide a notice, then you have to bring the ejectment within a certain time frame. And so what this proposal would do is actually shorten the time frame in which you have to bring the ejectment action or an ejectment under sub A or B, which is non-payment of rent or failure of the tenant to comply with the material terms or violent activity, etc. So if you're terminating because of one of those reasons, this proposal says you have to bring that ejectment action within 30 days. Currently, the section is 60 days. So it's putting more onus on the landlord to move that ejectment forward within that time frame.
Yes, Elizabeth.
If we are going to terminate, even if a full payment of back rent has been completed, then why are we setting up a program to help people pay back rent? Why do that?
Council.
If you pay rent, if you tender rent, if you're late, they can't terminate you. Go all the way back to the sub A.
I thought you just said, even if it was paid in full, that a rental agreement.
Accepting it doesn't stop the termination.
Yeah.
That's if it is for anything other than non-payment of rent. And my apologies if I,
Okay.
if that got confusing from how I phrased it. What it says here is,
I totally misunderstood that.
no, and
Maybe-
I may have, I may not have.
Let's make sure it's clear.
Right, I may not have articulated it in the best way. So this is saying that for any reason, this is on line 8 here. So for reasons other than non-payment of rent.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if you're dealing with non-payment of rent, that's separate. But if you pay, if you're getting a termination for non-payment of rent and then you pay rent, that termination is
Okay.
made null.
Okay.
So this would be for any other reason.
Yeah.
If you're terminating because the person has breached their rental agreement terms, or if
Oh,
you're terminating
I think
because
it's
you're
confusing.
repossessing the building, person is still paying rent, that doesn't somehow negate the termination.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, go on. I was actually reading statute. Yes. Debbie,
Well, I was just wondering why, because
why
right
the
now it's
30 days?
60 days.
Yeah, why? You know what? Do you know this came from Angela?
Yes.
I don't know why. I think the theory, you have not had any communication on this subject, but I think the theory, and I'm guessing, is when you're dealing with non-payment of rent, it's kind of like something that we can provide for the tenant. We're getting this over with. But then most landlords will want to do this. I mean, they'll want to move quickly. That's all I know. I really don't know anymore. Do you want us to put a sort of a check on this and check back as to,
Well, can I tell my reasons?
Sure.
For not putting 30
Yeah.
days? Is, I feel like it gives more time for the landlord and the tenant to resolve the issue. If we give a termination notice, it starts the conversation. They get a termination notice that they can take places to try to help them. Really,
that, and it's true that the termination notice, well, actually, I think it's an ejectment action. Yeah, but no, you're right.
I mean. that's-
Northeast Kingdom community action
Yes.
provides back rent help and stuff like that. And you're right, they would need that. Yeah,
Well, NECA if you, if you're a vulnerable person and you have issues with your rent, you take the termination notice and you bring it to them in 48 hours, they will know if you qualify. In 2 weeks, the landlord will have the money in hand.
Do they let the landlord know if you qualify?
Oh, yes. Oh, there's communication. Yes.
So you think 60 days is better because you think it gives more time for negotiation?
Yeah, I do. I mean, even if it's somebody that like, okay, you know, I wasn't able to work for 2 weeks, I'm gonna get behind in my rent. They get a termination notice. They're not gonna qualify for NECA, but they could take that notice and maybe take it to a church. I just need one-time help. That's all I need. So I just feel like it gives more time for negotiations, for setup of payment plans. And I mean, that's just the way I see it.
Okay,
Is NECA the program where they will provide rent if you're 3 months behind? And also you have to show that you would be able to pay your rent regularly.
I don't know what NECA,
I don't know if they're still doing that program, but they did have that program.
they do
We have
it,
to be careful
They
as
do it.
far as being so granular because
right? NECA has a program. It's up to them what the program is. NECA
not
came in.
everybody is
NECA, did
eligible.
NECA write us a letter yet? I asked NECA to write us a letter describing their program, okay? But I will tell you what my inclination is, and I just want the committee's reaction. I think Debbie makes a good point. I kind of am inclined to get, I mean, the landlord can always choose to bring it on after 5 days,
Exactly.
after 10, but if there's any chance of negotiation, I'm at this point kind of inclined to go with the 60. But I don't know what other people feel. We could do 45, we could do 60. I mean, on his next draft, we can ask Angela what she was thinking.
This is the only time I want more time.
I'm listening. What do you think? What do people think, guys?
my concern is just that not everybody is eligible for the programs.
Right. That's a fact of life that we're dealing with across the board.
More often
And
than
that's
not.
one reason that we're putting $1 million in the bill for the back rent,
Mhm.
the state housing authority back rent. I mean, we're asking for $1 million from appropriations.
Going back to 60 would. The consequence there is it could give a tenant more time. To find rent. Going back to how the statute's currently.
But if they can't, then that just lengthens the.
Well, it lengthens their time in the building.
Mhm.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the landlord. It gives the landlord, I think as a practical matter, the landlord's gonna just move forward unless they think that this is the kind of tenant that they can work with one way.
Mhm.
Are we okay with leaving it at 60? In this draft? I'll tell you what, let's put it for 60 in this draft, Cameron. And I'm gonna put a note here.
So the
Okay.
next, we are on page 12. This next subsection is about an affirmative defense to an ejectment action. You all recall, this was a section that states that if an individual landlord brings an ejectment based on non-payment of rents, then it can be a defense to that ejectment if there are certain code violations that exist, giving rise to the reason that the individual is not paying the rent. There were a few tweaks here based on feedback from the judiciary. And so for an ejectment action based on a failure to pay rent pursuant to subsection A of this section, it shall be an affirmative defense to the defendant and judgment shall be issued for the defendant. It initially said that the case would be dismissed. And my understanding is the recommendation from your judiciary testimony was to say that judgment would be issued for the defendant. If there exists a serious health and safety code violation, And then there was the request to ensure that there had been a citation issued to the landlord that remain uncured, and so that's what I've added here. Safety code violation issued to the landlord under 20 VSA 2677, which is the section that gives the Division of Fire Safety the authority to issue those violations. And it's uncorrected as of the date of termination. And so then it gives a list of possible violations that this could include. Then you get down to page 13. What I did here under the sub 2 is I just mirrored what currently exists in another section. This was similar, but just worded slightly differently. It's just stating that the tenant can't take advantage of this remedy if the violation itself was caused by the negligent or deliberate act or omission from the tenant or a person on the premises with the tenant's license to be there.
Just to clarify, this section, the changes to this section are a result of a number of pieces of testimony and correspondence that we received. The entire concept came from legal aid. They felt that this was a case in other states and that it should be here. I put in a list of major violations because I didn't want a tenant to be able to defeat an ejectment action on the basis of some minor code violation that wasn't important. Landlords had two suggestions. One is the language you see up there that, hey, it shouldn't apply if the tenant causes the damage, which unfortunately does occur. But the other was landlords sometimes testified, and by testified both orally but in writing, they don't find out about code violation until the ejectment action when suddenly they're told. And the feeling was this should be limited to ejectment, to a situation where prior to the filing of the ejectment action, there was a ticket issued and it was uncured. So in other words, it's not just something that occurred, that it's not, the tenant cannot allege a code violation during the ejectment action that didn't exist prior to the ejectment. Deb,
Okay, so this is even for like non-payment of rent.
this is just for non-payment.
Okay, well, because, I'm thinking of a situation. Code is fluid.
Yeah.
So it's like you have an inspection of a building and it's like, oh my goodness, your egress window it has to be bigger. It has to be larger now. So now you have 8 windows that you have to replace. They have to be special ordered. So you've got a time frame, like they say, fix this in 2 weeks. We can't fix it in 2 weeks. We have to order the custom windows and then we have to install each one at a time. We have to make arrangements with it, the whole shebang. And it's like where would that fit in?
The way that would fit in is if it didn't say just uncorrected. It said uncorrected or in the process of substantial correction. Or something like that. In other words, I think that if a landlord is in good faith, is in the midst of, it's just the windows haven't come in.
Yes, I'm trying to play it out as the language is written. You're assuming that you get an inspection that says the windows need to be expanded.
Right.
And
Which is not, by the way, I know
It's
from
not
my own
listed.
experience, it's not crazy, it happens.
but then the tenant is not paying rent because of that?
Well, no, it's just the
That's scenario
tenant,
that's covered.
the tenant isn't paying rent anyway for some other reason.
But if that's not listed here,
It is
with
H.
very next.
In other words, what Debbie's saying, just to frame it, what Debbie's raising the hypothetical, which is the kind of thing we have to do here. She's saying, what happens if
I have an
the
idea.
ticket is issued and she's fixing it, or someone is fixing it, not to put it all on her, is fixing it, but it isn't done yet. So it's not cured yet, but not fully corrected. Yes,
So in that scenario, it was a code that was suddenly, that you're suddenly in violation of code.
well, you're told because
That-
there was an inspection for some reason, and
Right.
once they come out, they look around for whatever.
Right, and so the there's got to be something, maybe we can create language that is something like, this is a brand new, you've just been made aware of something that you didn't know before, I mean, either we have a contract ahead, like when you're signing a lease that clarifies the conditions of the property, and then you can check back later to see if that was acceptable or not.
Yes,
Does that align with if the tenant somehow reported that there's some kind of a violation and that's what triggered the,
it could be that.
does
It could
this
be
all
that.
align?
There's lots of reasons why somebody usually, in Vermont, someone has to file a complaint. So it's good. I mean, I don't think, does the landlord, in your experience, have you ever asked affirmatively for code inspections?
Yes, but who we're more afraid of is the insurance companies.
Yes, okay. This is not about them. I would ask council that you come up with some language in uncorrected that doesn't requires that the correction be either completed or substantially in the process of completion or something to your satisfaction in the next draft. Is that okay?
I would potentially propose maybe moving it from here. So there is a current section that authorizes a tenant to not pay rent due to habitability issues. And it states that the landlord fails to make repairs within a reasonable time. And so if that's what you're thinking you want to include, some reasonableness in the time frame, I would potentially just move the entire section here.
Well, remember, it's a defense to an ejection action. So it's about ejectment. It's
Right.
not about habitability.
Right. But
Withholding, it's not about withholding of rent. It's something extra.
but it is, right, because it's saying that your withholding of rent shall not be the basis for an ejectment for non-payment, right? So I would potentially add it here. So it's, if the landlord fails to comply with the obligations of habitability and after notice from the tenant, government entity, qualified inspector, the landlord fails to make the repairs within a reasonable time, and the non-compliance affects the health and safety, the tenant may, and I would leave probably all of this the same, and I would just include something similar to say that it would be a defense against failure to pay rent or an ejectment action here, and that way I don't know that you need to specify some of this stuff because it's already.
Look at this.
I don't like reasonable time. I think it's too vague.
I think you should just put where it says uncorrected. Just add something like, or that uncorrected as of the date of termination or correction is underway, is substantially underway, or something like
In
that.
the process,
Yeah.
not thinking about it.
Yeah, that is substantially underway or whatever, and give it, I can see our lawyer is skeptical, so you have to come up with the language for the next draft.
Gail does?
No,
I do.
no, Gail just shot down his approach. I don't know, are you used to that, counsel?
He's still smiling.
I will get the,
You'll give it thought.
yes.
Okay, all right. What's next?
Okay. Next, we are done with the termination notice section. So we are on page 13. Okay, this is the section in the residential rental agreement chapter, which is just referencing to where the ejectment case is brought. So, Mr. Chair, as you mentioned in the beginning, right, we're dealing with two separate things. You have the termination period, termination notice period that exists in the residential rental agreement chapter. And then if somebody remains after the termination notice date, then you have to bring the ejectment case against the individual. And so this section is referencing that. If the tenant remains in possession after the termination without the consent of the landlord may bring the ejectment action. And this is adding in the new subchapter that we've included later in the ejectment section, which is where we're moving to now.
Okay, so everybody there, in other words, now we're changing. That paragraph was in existing law. They stay after you've terminated, then you have to bring in the check. Okay, and now we're at that action, yes.
Okay, so now we're moving into Title 12, which is about court procedure. This is where we've added in, or say, the proposal is to add in the language from 688 about alternates.
Where are you?
I'm on the top of page 14. So this is the section that states that when the court orders the alternate service of process be made.
This is Debbie's language, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So the order is in line 4, the order remains in effect and applies to all subsequent service of process in the same proceeding, including post-judgment proceeding. So if the court orders that you can provide service via a TAC order, for example, you don't have to ask for that every single time you have to serve documents. It would apply for the remainder of the proceeding.
By the way, just so you all know, I did have a conversation with counsel again, in which my idea was shot down. I was saying, why do we need a TAC order at all? Why do we need any order from the court? Why can't, remember that section way in the beginning where we provided what notice was? Why don't we just say that's notice and that's enough? And he persuasively argued to me that we were buying into a whole hassle of trouble if we were going to do that, because this is civil law and civil proceedings, and it has its own,
Right.
now you're not just in the private relationship between the landlord and the tenant, you're in the courts, and that if we messed with that, it was at our peril. So I backed off. Yes.
Elizabeth's not here, but she brought up an interesting point about being able to serve that by someone other than the sheriff.
Right.
Right, so her whole thing, and I said, we talked about it, is in her county right now. Oh, and yours as well, Tom. You have a situation with their sheriff. So what happens when those types of situations, who else is able to fulfill these obligations? If I assume folks in the committee know.
Yeah.
The Windsor County Sheriff situation.
Yes.
So she raised a good point, which I thought was a good point, is what happens then?
You can use other county sheriffs.
Okay, so
Now-
then,
Now you can, you couldn't, you didn't used to.
Right.
Last year, we changed that.
okay, maybe she didn't.
There is
know
other
that.
staff. It doesn't have to be the sheriff. that
Okay.
Goes out and does this. It has to be somebody on
So
their
we're good.
staff. So there's other officers that's still functioning.
So they
still have,
staff
I can do this.
can do it under this, right?
Other deputy sheriffs, that's whatever they're called. I don't know, what are they called?
I think that's it.
Deputy sheriffs.
Okay, so
Deputies.
we're good.
Like what they hire for the fair.
Well. Maybe not, but yeah,
Okay, so we're good,
so they're functioning.
I think.
I was persuaded just on this subject. Remember earlier, I don't know if you remember a conversation a while back where I was asking the sheriff. And I think I asked another testament. Do we really need the sheriff to do this as opposed to the parties?
Oh,
And-
right.
And
Okay.
everybody was telling me, no, you don't want to do that. It's too
It's not
dangerous.
safe.
It's not safe,
Right.
requires training. And so it's the sheriff.
I think that was doing the writ of possession.
Yeah, right.
He was on that
I was
one.
just say, so keep in mind that there's the rules of civil procedure do not require service from the sheriff.
Yeah.
They're, the only thing that's my understanding, and you know, we're about to go through the language again, that the requirement for the sheriff is in regards to the writ of possession. As
Right.
Sheriff Dalton just mentioned,
Right.
which is required to be delivered to the sheriff. Okay. So you have the authority here that when, you know, alternate service of process is ordered, it applies to the entire proceeding. And then we have a cleanup. This is on the bottom of page 14, top of page 15, regarding service of process for current ejectment actions. And this is just saying unless otherwise provided by law, to cover the fact that we just authorized it in the section above.
Yeah.
So that's just technical cleanup. Now we get into this next piece on page 15, starting on line 3. Payment of rent into court. This is a current section that exists. You all walked through it about when you're bringing the ejectment action, you as the landlord can file a motion to have payment issued into court during that process, during the ejectment case. I mentioned this a while back. Currently, in this section, there are 2 subdivision As that exist and are technically both law. There is a slight conflict, not a big conflict between them, but I'm including them both here because my ask or recommendation to you all is to take the opportunity to fix it.
Is there any objection to council fixing this error in the statute?
No, I vote for council to fix it.
So, what I.
Things you're gonna have to resolve inconsistencies.
Yes, so when you're looking at it, the second section is just more detailed and limits the ejectment, the references to the termination specifically. So I will go with the second sub A versus the first sub A because it is providing a little more specificity as to what ejectments you're bringing.
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, so this is 4853A, small a, not in parentheses, right? It's
Yes,
just,
sir. When we run out of room in our statutory section numbering, we go to lowercase.
because there is already a 4353 and there's a 4354.
Yes, sir.
I got it. Okay.
Okay, so the next thing to focus on for this section is the sub D at the bottom of this page, because the proposal in this amendment, which is similar to what is in 688, is to remove the ability to order partial payment into court during this process. So you as the landlord, you're going in, filing the motion, I want payment, provided into court during the ejectment process. Currently, the court can order full or partial payment, and this change would remove partial and would only authorize full payment into court.
Now, I'm going to summarize some testimony, but I'm going to also ask some help from people in the room. What we've done here, basically subject to the few changes, is just taken the whole payment of rent into court and just put it in here, okay? So the payment into court option is here. And as you remember, under the payment into court, we've had testimony that it's an option. The landlord they can file it with a complaint or request for payment of rent into court. And then theoretically, the way it works is rent is paid into the court. And then if it isn't, there's a rather accelerated time frame. The landlord is entitled to possession. If it is, then there's a trial. If whatever happens, it goes one way or the other. If the tenant wins, I guess the tenant gets the rent back. If the landlord wins, the landlord keeps the rent. We had testimony from a number of people and in writing of problems with this process. One problem is that it takes a long time to get to hearing.
Right.
4 to 6 weeks or longer. Another problem was that there tends to be, sometimes courts do not, they just choose to award some arbitrarily defined number that doesn't reflect the rent. And the other concern is that very often they don't order back rent. In other words, you bring the action on January 1, well, I'm just using that, you wouldn't, January 2, and that by the time the rent hearing,
Right.
payment of rent into court is in March, that they'll award rent from March on, not March back. So just summarizing all that we've heard. So this here is addressing this change to eliminate or partial, is eliminating one of those issues. The question I want to ask is whether the partial is useful for negotiation purposes. Will we see a big drop off in payment of rent into court? You know, what's the real thoughts on the real world implications of this? I mean, I understand the reason from the landlord's perspective, but
Right. So we're at, where I want to know what the committee. I see there's some head nod no over that side. What are, right, you don't,
Me?
yeah,
Oh, no,
you are a member of the committee.
you don't want it.
I like the partial being out.
You don't want the partial, okay,
Full payment.
is there advocates for the partial? I think we heard why partial is important from some people. Leonore, do you?
I mean, I think that the if we can help with the rental arrears and the if there's an inability to pay and we're trying to shorten everything for people to get the help that they need. You know, I could see why partial is important in that situation, right? That we're putting more time pressure, more of a constraint on the steps.
Yeah, and I've talked to some landlords who are, again, this is anecdotally because they're not here to testify, but are comfortable with that, right? It's not. Okay, so it's.
And we are leaving it up to the court, we say full or partial.
Right.
I mean, that's the way it's been.
Yeah, so I'm.
Which is why it isn't used a lot, apparently. It's one of the reasons that landlords elect not to use. Just one.
I'm comfortable with it, but
Which way?
partial.
Partial.
Or full or part, I mean, the way that
Partial.
it's, I think that's not the biggest.
Okay,
I
go
don't see that
on.
as a huge impediment for somebody who's already.
And like I said, I have consulted with people who are okay with that too, moving beyond that.
On the landlord side. Yes.
I think if it's only full and not partial, then. I mean, partial is better than zero. So I'm very comfortable with partial.
Is, what happens, counsel, I'm wondering, if the landlord ultimately wins, they get the rent that's paid into court
They can ask for it during the proceeding.
during the proceeding. If they win, then they, am I right, they get possession, they also theoretically get back rent, but in fact, almost all of the tenants are judgment proof, and so they don't get the back rent. Is that right?
I think that's a good assumption.
Yeah, okay. So any payment into court is a plus if the landlord wishes to use it. I think the sense of the group at the moment is to leave it in. I'm going to put a circle around this, okay?
Yeah, the majority sense.
So I'm
I'm
just
just-
gonna still, I'm gonna, remember, we're just redrafting. Okay, all right,
But there's a star for
yeah,
continued discussion.
yeah.
Okay, so then when you get to the top of page 16 of subsection G, it goes along with the same discussion we were just having, because this subsection authorizes the tenant to file their own motion to reduce the amount that's asked. So if you're going to remove partial, then you should remove the subsection G at the same time. They go hand in hand.
Right.
So if we leave it in, we leave it in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so now we're moving to the next section, which is 4854A. This is about property of the tenant remaining in the eviction. If you all recall, this was the discussion that we were having about the landlord has issued the writ. It's served by the sheriff, and then not earlier than 14 days after it's served, the sheriff can come back and remove the individual from the property. And then what does the landlord do with the property after they're put into possession? And they have to maintain it for another 15 days according to the statute. And so the proposal in this amendment, based on the discussion you all had, was to go with the 14+0 option. So when the landlord is put into possession of that property, at that point, they can immediately dispose of the property without there being any liability for it.
So what's really happening here is that council is redrafting the law to clarify that the Leonora Dodge interpretation of the prior law was, and the sheriff's interpretation of the prior law was correct, despite the fact that council and I disagree. Right?
Technically, I didn't change any of the language that people seem to find confusing. I just changed it to immediately. So it's just
Yeah, okay.
when the.
Right. You took the 15 days out.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just when the landlord gets.
Right,
possession.
so it all teasing aside, so the evidence that we have heard has, from a number of parties, has clarified that this is in fact the current interpretation of the law, which is that a landlord is entitled to possession of the possessions immediately upon being put into legal possession of the unit. I mean, physical possession of the unit.
So I thought,
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
I thought the confusion was like, what is the difference between like a judgment being made versus
That was
no,
the,
versus when the tenant is informed that the judgment has been made and now you must vacate.
right,
Right.
it was physical possession, whichever is later and all of that. And
Yeah.
that's all taken care of by the ambiguity is gone.
So what I could do
So
is.
after it's served.
I could. So. What I can do to try to further clarify this is remove. That language that I just highlighted on screen. And it would just be immediately upon being legally restored to possession of the dwelling. And then I would also strike the whichever is later.
Yeah, it's not, yeah, whichever is later, I think you should. I think should be all we're saying is the current interpretation of the law, I'm gonna restate it one more time. Current interpretation of the law, as interpreted by a number of our witnesses, was whatever it said, it was
Bless you.
interpreted that the sheriff, the writ issues from the court. The sheriff serves it. 14 days, at least, after the sheriff serves the writ. At that point, the sheriff goes into the apartment and removes the tenant if the tenant has not removed themselves. The next day, that's called the landlord being legally restored to possession. It's not the writ issued by the court. It's not the service. It's when the landlord is legally restored to possession. I could say physically, but whatever. Then the next day, the landlord can remove the possessions. That is the current law,
Right,
right? Is that right?
no,
What do you think? Didn't we hear testimony
Yeah, I
from the
don't like-
sheriff, et cetera, that is, and didn't we decide 15 plus 0?
yeah, right, not immediate,
Well, that's
14.
Well, it's the end of close of business on the 14th day. You want to say the next day?
So there's the separate section.
Yeah.
Not in this bill, because you're not amending, which says that the sheriff serves the paper, the writ, and then not earlier than 14 days. comes
Right.
back.
Okay, so,
Right,
So there is a maximum of a 14-day period. That's
Okay.
not a guarantee. The sheriff could serve the paper
Oh,
and the
yeah,
tenant
right.
says, okay, I
They
guess
leave.
this is
Right,
real,
right.
and they leave.
but
Yeah.
no more than. No more than,
Yeah, well, and or the sheriff could wait 20 days.
that's their prerogative.
Right.
So
Well, we're
In
saying-
essence, they have 14 days to remove
they
their
have a
belongings.
A
minimum.
minimum of 14 days
Mhm.
from being served
Mhm.
under current law.
This change would be is saying at that
Right.
point, after that 14 days, when the sheriff comes back and physically secures the property against that individual,
Right,
the landlord can dispose of that property immediately there.
Debbie, you look,
Well, I thought it was
You
also
look sick.
current law. I'm just talking current.
Yeah.
that if it's in a writ of possession for non-payment of rent, it's
It's-
7 days.
if it's 7 days for non-payment of rent when it's in the payment of rent into the court.
So there is the
It's
separate
just, it's not
section.
non-payment of rent. It's if you use that court payment of rent into court and they don't pay the rent, it's 7 days. We don't want to change any of that.
no,
We just want to say, whenever it is that you are put into possession, then bam, the next day you can take the stuff.
and you don't like that, Debbie?
Well, I'd like it shorter.
I think this is reasonable, though.
I think what she wants is that we went through this before. Well, we discussed it before. It doesn't mean we can't discuss it again. That doesn't have to do with when the landlord is entitled to. This section just says whenever it is that the
Yeah.
landlord gets possession, then they're entitled to get rid of the property. Okay. The other issue, which is Debbie is alluding to, is, well, how much time? From the time that the writ is served, should the tenant have to get their stuff out and move? Debbie's saying she would prefer it was
I
shorter.
understand.
And I think we had the discussion once
Right,
and we decided to leave it at 14 days as reasonable.
yeah, I am still advocating personally for that.
The theory was that tenants need time to get their stuff out and move. Debbie's theory was 7 days is enough.
They haven't, they know what's coming. I mean, they're going through this whole process. So there's time built in.
Agreed, yeah, I mean,
Works.
disagree.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just want to have one more discussion. Yeah,
Now,
But if somebody is working, that's not a whole lot of time for them to get their stuff out. And where are they gonna put it? And they, they have to
30
find,
days? I mean, how much time?
no,
14.
14 is, I think 14 is.
Is that a deal breaker for you for the bill?
she hasn't decided. So-
Oh, I'm putting her on the spot.
Oh, go ahead. If she
I
can say
think-
if she hasn't decided.
The overarching goal, we're trying to find compromise where everyone gives a little bit. If this is like the one that is like I know that we're all sent to do what we believe in and want the most, like, of course, your perspective, like, can you live with that? Or you don't know yet on this provision?
I'm just trying to bring balance to the tenant landlord laws.
Right. So this seems like a reasonable balance. I think if you were to ask a tenant advocate, they might think this wasn't good enough. Right? So I think that the consensus of a lot of folks on the committee was this was the balance, was this 14 days. You, I get, would like it to be less. But I think others on the committee think this is, if I was fighting for what I personally wanted, it might look different than that, but I'm here to find the balances. So that's why I'm okay with the 14.
The question, I think, I don't want to put anyone too much on.
I don't
on the
mind.
spot, But you don't mind. I just feel like people have to decide that in the next day or two. how
Where
they're gonna
they're-
get Where they are.
Where their hard lines are in the balance.
Yeah.
Right, we all are gonna be, I think we're all giving here in this bill, which has been amazing that everyone has really come together to do that. But everyone will have their hard lines of what is and isn't, and if this one is one of yours, I would write that down.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm gonna do, just to clarify. We're about to break for lunch. Right after lunch, we're gonna keep this process on and we'll finish. Are you out? What's your?
I don't know.
I have to be in Ways and Means for an hour.
Yeah.
Between 1:15 and 2:15.
Okay.
On 7:57.
7:57, okay.
I can be back. here at
That's.
What are we gonna do without you? Oh, yeah, we could have a discussion.
Right,
I'll be
I'll tell you
gone.
what.
So that's a
Tell you
good-
what, why don't we, how would people feel if we just keep going for another 30 minutes?
Right
And then we
now,
come back later. Oh, you can't.
Without,
I'm starving.
without cameras, so.
No, do you have to go down?
Well, we need to give Cameron time for lunch.
Everyone,
Who says food?
I have to pick up a sandwich.
I mean,
At the dog's house.
send me out. Can I just make sure that for just on this, I thought that this represented a compromise because previously the language or the other section where this is spelled out, it looked like it was 30 days. It looked like it was 29 days.
Right.
And so this is a clarification
Yeah.
to bring it all the way from 29 to 14.
Right,
Right. And so just wanted
there's the
to
compromise.
lay that out.
We're
Okay,
compromising.
we're gonna leave this part of the draft as is.
Just store it.
Yeah, but let's,
Store it.
but I do wanna know, all right, it's 12 o'clock. What,
I'm so hungry.
wait a minute, don't go yet, you damn it. We're still live. At we're scheduled to meet at 1 o'clock. We can meet without Cameron. Cameron, when are you available? 2:15.
Or sooner, but I will hard stop 2:15 for Ways. I will hard stop at 2:15 in Ways and Means.
Yeah.
And then come back.
It might be sooner if you were available.
Yes, sir.
Why don't we just say then? I mean, I do think we have to finish the bill. And so what, before I decide what.
Oh, I was gonna decide, what if we, at that point, had a committee discussion without Cameron, how folks are feeling
We
about
can do
it.
that. Why don't we reconvene here at 1:15?
Yeah.
We'll have a committee discussion. We have an hour to talk. I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to get us to the point tomorrow, Thursday. I want to have kind of a sense of how people feel. I want people to say, okay, I may not love this, but I can live with it, or I can't. I just want to know. And then we can have a straw poll, or we can just get a sense of the body. And then tomorrow, I'd like to have a committee vote.
And to get there, we have to go through, we have to keep.
Yeah, we have to keep
Walking through all
working
the
through it, but we can
Yeah.
have discussions. So why don't we meet at 1:15, have a discussion, we'll have a break, then we'll have council continue. Is that all right?
That
Everyone?
sounds perfect.
Okay,